All right, hi everybody. So today you're going to get essentially the couple hour course of mammalogy that usually would take an entire semester for my students. So it's going to all be crammed into just a little bit of time. And we're going to cover a lot of stuff, but we're not going to be able to cover nearly as much as we would in a full course. But we'll still talk about some cool stuff. Yeah, it should be all right. I'm going to trip, but it'll be fun. It'll be funny. All right. So mammals of northeastern Indiana and beyond. In order to talk about mammals in general, and before we get to the actual mammals here in Indiana, we actually have to go through the history of mammals. All right, so extant diversity of mammals as compared to all other vertebrates, mammals are, oh yeah, I forgot, this laser pointer doesn't work. Mammals are just a little chunk of what is available of all vertebrates here on Earth. The vast majority of vertebrates are all fishies, right? Then you got a decent amount of aves, which are birds, and you can also include crocodiles and dinosaurs in there, though there are no dinosaurs. Then you have lepidosaurs, which is the snakes and lizards, and anuras or amphibians are a little bit bigger than just mammals. So we're really the smallest group, or the least diverse group of vertebrates here on Earth, right? But we're the coolest, and also everyone likes mammals, and they tend to be the big fluffy guys that everyone just pays attention to at zoos. So they get a lot of the attention, right? Which is fine by me. There are a couple of major groups of mammals that have existed throughout the ages, right? We have the prototherians, which are the monotremes, right there, monotremata. They evolved way back here in the Jurassic period, right? So mammals have been around for a very long time, not nearly as long as, say, archosaurs, dinosaurs, and things like that, but they evolved. In fact, the crown group of mammals evolved well before the Jurassic period. So they were around during the time of the dinosaurs, right? Then there's a whole bunch of other ones that essentially evolved and died, and we can go deep into them in the actual course that I teach. But we had multituberculata, which is a fun word to say. Multituberculates, like these guys. These were the dominant arboreal critters for a relatively long time. And they fit the same niche as a certain type of animal that we have around here. What kind of animal do they look like? A squirrel, right? They essentially did the same exact things as squirrels. In fact, our squirrels can have turn their ankles backwards so they can hold on to the trees without actually moving their claws, moving their feet, right? They actually had prehensile tails, like an opossum. Their tails could wrap around trees and support their weight. And they also ate seeds and acorns, if acorns were around there. Maybe not back then. But all those types of seed type things, like our rodents, like our squirrels do. But the biggest difference are the tail looks a little bit different, but their teeth are very different. Whereas the rodents have those biting teeth, these guys have just gigantic molars. We actually have a really cool cast of one of these in the collections. So they were the dominant herbivore for a very long time. And then they went extinct very quickly once the therians evolved. The therians include the metatherians, which are the marsupials. Right, here's theria right here. And the eutherians, which are us. Eutherians are the placental mammals. Placental mammals. They have placentas. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Right? And the multituberculates went extinct because with eutheria, you have the rodents. And the rodents evolved and they just outcompeted and decimated everything else that was around at that time. They were so competitive that they just took over. And they are currently the most diverse mammal group in the world. Right? There's something like, out of the 4,800 mammals, 3,000 are rodents. right? Something along those lines. The next most diverse are bats, and then there's room for everything else after that. Right? So rodents evolved, decimated all the other mammals, except for some of the other therians. Right? So after that happened, all of these other groups died off until there was only metatherians, eutherians, and just a couple of monotremes. We still have a couple of monotremes sticking around, and we'll talk about those because they're really cool. Okay, so the vast majority of mammals that were around at any time have been extinct, and they went extinct primarily because of rodents. That guy, that guy, that guy, that guy, and that guy. Yeah, except for monotremes and the therians.
When you say like the rodents clear them out, I mean they just had some kind of evolutionary adaptation to survive, right?
Exactly. No, there was no. I mean, there were some big rodents at one point, and we're doing a lot of camera track work, which I don't have. I wonder if I have any videos, but I have some videos of mice eating my chicken bait. Like I have chicken legs as bait for carnivores, and there's mice eating them. So they will eat meat, but I don't think they actually ate them. They just outcompeted them, and they are better at eating grains, and they are better at dealing with environmental changes and things like that. Okay, good question. Oh yeah, by the way, just shout out questions. I like talking, but I also like not talking. And so if you guys have questions, go for it. Okay? So, now we know a little bit of the history. Let's talk about what makes a mammal, and we'll go into the diversity of mammals that are around. What's that guy? That's a duck-billed platypus, which when the first systematics saw this, they thought it was a hoax. They thought someone stringed together a duck, a beaver, and something else and just gave it to them. Right? They didn't actually know that it was a real thing until they actually went to Australia and found them. So, mammalian features. What makes a mammal a mammal? Placenta for some of them. Mammary glands, and that's lactation. They nurse their young. Hair is a big one. There's a couple of other things that we may or may not get to, but the big ones include lactation and hair. Right? So lactation is common to all mammals, but only therians, including marsupials and eutherians, actually have nipples. The monotremes that we have produce milk, but they actually don't have nipples to provide milk to their young, right? So basic nipple. The therians have them, just like we do, right? But the monotremes don't. And I'll show you a picture about what monotremes do later. It's very interesting, right? Now, I want to say that lactation is common to all mammals, but actually milk isn't. Milk is actually present in birds as well. Pigeons make crop milk. So, I mean, you could milk a pigeon. You probably don't want to milk a pigeon, but they produce milk in their crop, which is essentially a bag in their throat. And then their pigeon babies dip their head in there, and they actually lap up the milk. It's milk. It does the same exact thing as mammal milk. It's just chemically a little bit different. There's also an amphibian that produces milk. It's actually their skin that they liquidize, and then the babies lick it off of them. It's milk, but not mammal milk. The amphibian is called caecilians, which are this weird worm-type amphibians. Very cool. Right? Oh yeah, so this is the monotremes. They do not have nipples. Instead, they have milk patches. So instead of delivering milk through a nipple, they essentially excrete the milk in a milk patch on their bellies, and they essentially just lie down on their back, and then the babies come up and they lap the milk off their bellies. It's not nearly as effective, but it works. Right? And that shows you just how different the monotremes are. There's another really big difference that we'll talk about later. Right? A monotreme? Mm-hmm. We'll talk about what monotremes, that's a cliffhanger. We'll get to that later. Sorry. We just saw those. Duckbill platypus is a monotreme. Usually, yeah. Now, I will say, we call them primitive. They're very basic, but they've survived, which makes them complex enough to deal with life stressors. Right? But yeah, they're primitive. The next mammalian feature is hair. All mammals have hair. But it's important to state that hair is actually just a highly adaptive scale. These are really, really well-adapted scales. Just like feathers are really well-adapted scales. All right? They're all made out of the same proteins, keratin, other things. They've just been evolved and adapted to do very different things. But they all came from generally the same thing. Okay? It's keratin, which is a protein, growing from the epidermis, so the skin, at a hair follicle. Right? So here's the hair follicle. That's the only place that hair grows. Right? And the hair will grow from this spot right here. You have cell division, and cells are dividing. More and more cells are being made. That grows the hair. Up past this area, away from that hair follicle, all of that hair is dead. So all of the hair that it comes out of your scalp is all dead. It's only alive at the very base of that area, which is why eventually the hair dies. And sometimes the hair follicle dies, and you get these patches of no hair that I'm slowly getting more of. You get baldness. There are different types of hairs, like vibrissae, which is the fancy term for whiskers. And all these different types of hair have different functions. What is the function of vibrissae, or whiskers? Yeah, so it's tactile senses, right? So why would, this is a fur seal, it's kind of like a sea lion. Why would a fur seal need a bunch of vibrissae? Swimming? Yeah. Okay, you can see pretty well with that, but that helps. What? Find the food at the bottom, right? So if they want to stick their nose into, say, like coral as they're swimming around, or probably not other places as well, they can stick their vibrissae in there, and they can feel around and find a fish or whatever it is that they eat, right? Or as they're swimming and they're getting close to another fur seal and they happen to brush them, they know to like back off and swim the other way, right? Oh, I got ahead of myself. The benefit of that? There's also different types of hair. One that I also want to talk about, which I don't have there, is guard hair. And you can see that with this gray fox fur. And it's these little tough hairs that stick out of the main pelt. Right? That's guard hair. And that does exactly what it says. It guards the hair, essentially. Right? It's a tough, very straight and stubbornly falling out hair that protects the under fur. You can see that nice under fur. That it protects that layer from damage, because it's the under fur that does all of the insulation. It does all of the protection of thermal benefits and things like that. So you want the guard hair to protect that layer. You don't want the under fur to actually fall out. And it's the guard hair that makes up the lion's mane. It's the guard hair that makes up the manes of horses and things like that. So I'll pass around Mr. Gray Fox. you guys want to check that out. Now, all mammals also have something called piloerection, which occurs with the help of the erector pili muscles, which is this thingy right here, right? And those are little tiny, tiny, tiny muscles attached to every hair. They're attached to the hair, also attached up to the top of the epidermis, right? And with every muscle, you have contraction that allows movement. So it actually allows the hair to move. Why? Why would you want your hair to move? To show you're angry, right? Anyone have dogs that raise their hackles, right? The back of their neck raises up. Okay. What else? Oh, that's a good one. The underfur that you're going to be seeing right here, one of the main reasons why it's so insulative, it's so good at trapping heat, is that there's space in between it, in between chunks of fur. And when there's space, air can get trapped there. And then that air heats up based on just body heat. And now you have this nice little pockets of warm hair throughout the fur, right? So if you can raise up the fur, you can trap more air and you can warm that up. There's also that. There's a good old porcupine. Raises up its guard hairs, which is what the spines are, just really big guard hairs. Raises it up to essentially be intimidating and also to protect itself. Right? There's the hackles. I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I need a pointer, so my muskrat's going to be the pointer. There's the hackles right there. Right? So that's communication. And it can be used for a variety of different types of communication. Do we have erector pili muscles? What hair do we move? Do we have hackles? That's goosebumps. That is vestigial, which means we don't really use it anymore. What's the function of goosebumps? Yeah, I mean, that could be something. But it's left over from when we did have mats of fur, and it's trapping heat in there, right? You get goosebumps when you're cold. Your erector pili muscles are raising up to try to trap more heat, trap more air in your fur coat, which you don't have anymore. So it's vestigial, right? But still super cool. Like we have that. That's evidence, more evidence that we are mammals, that we are connected to all of these guys. Right? Questions? Hair or fur can be a variety of different colors. And the color that each individual hair is dependent on the amount and type of melanin, which is another type of protein. It can be a pigment protein. Okay, and you can get a variety of different types of color based on how much is in there. All right, so here we have a almost true albino giraffe. And you get albinism or albinos when either you don't produce enough melanin, or for some reason the melanin doesn't get embedded in the hair. Right? There's two different ways that can happen. You can also get different types of patchiness. You can get melanistic individual, which is a very dark individual, so like what we call a black squirrel or something like that. And that's where you don't have one type of melanin. It's called pheomelanin, which codes for red. Instead, you get a bunch of eumelanin, which is dark brown and black. Right? And that can change with different individuals. Right? And then another important thing about hair is that usually, for the most part, every mammal molts. And that's when, at least once a year, their fur just it gets tossed off, it dies, and you grow a new patch of fur. And that can be really important for some mammals, like this one. This is a least weasel. It's the smallest carnivore in the world. And we have it around here. Yep. And these guys will molt before winter and develop a pure white coat. For what reason? Camouflage, right? And then during the summer, they'll molt again and they'll get this coat. A least weasel. I only have one of this guy, so I'm not going to pass him around. You can come up and look at him later. He's super cool. Right, so molting can be very important. It also heals damaged fur. There's a whole variety of reasons why animals will lose their fur. And by molting it, they can essentially build a new layer, a better layer. Melanin, yep. Yep, and that changes the color of the coat. Yep, I'm still looking for them. Yeah. So we're doing a lot of weasel research nowadays with camera traps, and we're getting long-tailed weasels, which I didn't bring. But we have yet to find a least weasel, and I am pretty darn sure that they're here. I just need to find evidence. And they're really hard to observe, so we don't really know. Right? No, they're don't see very often. Yeah. Same thing. Well, you can find these guys and at least the long-tailed weasels in just the edge of your farm. Okay. It's just that they're so quick and they're so secretive that you just never see them. Okay. All right. It's the same as mink, but we'll talk about them later. All right. Mammal features, also glands. Along with the hair, you get a bunch of glands. Right? And some of these glands secrete oils into the hair follicle, which can be really dang important. You can get eccrine glands. And this is actually stuff that is secreted on the feet and prehensile tails of monkeys. Right? And improves adhesion in those feet and prehensile tails. It's a little bit sticky, and it just adds just that little bit of adhesion and grip that it could save them from falling off the tree. Right? So that's what it is for monkeys and some other organisms. For us, it's sweat. Right? Our eccrine glands are attached to our hair follicles, and it helps us with evaporative cooling, which is when you get all sweaty, the sweat gets on your skin, and then it evaporates, and that cools you down. Right? So right now, it's evaporative cooling in us, but in our ancestors, it was for increased grip, which is pretty cool. Sebaceous glands. This is really important for a lot of more semi-aquatic mammals, like my muskrat. It waterproofs and conditions the hair and skin, right? If this guy didn't have a sebaceous gland, usually a sebaceous gland is close to the hind leg, and they kind of preen it, they'll kind of collect the oil, and then they'll rub the sebaceous sweat throughout their fur, and that waterproofs the fur. And that way, when they actually go swimming, the fur doesn't get in the underlayer and get rid of all that trapped air, right? Because if it gets rid of the trapped air, they will freeze extremely quickly. Right? And that's why they are able to swim around in wintertime if they need to. Right? So sebaceous glands, incredibly important for aquatic animals. It's also really good for scent marking, right? Which many, many mammals rely on this for scent marking. It's a really big communication method for a lot of different mammals. The difference between hair and fur, I usually point to a hair as a single thing, and fur is the collective hairs, right? So fur is kind of the same thing as hairs in my mind, all right? Does that make sense? And then the last one is apocrine, which is also good for scent marking. It's actually used for sweating in ungulates. And ungulates include hoofed animals. Right? So things like cows, deer, horses, it's the apocrine gland that is used for sweating, not the eccrine gland. All throughout. right? So this is just cool because you have two very different sweat glands that kind of do the same exact thing, just for different critters, which suggests that it's really adaptive. If two different glands evolve to do the same exact thing, that shows that it's really good at what it does. Okay? And then you have some really crazy stuff that mammals get, right? Integumentary structures, which just means stuff that comes out of the skin, right? A lot of this has to do with hair, or is a very adaptive form of hair, right? So things like nails, hooves, horns, right? They are all accumulations of keratin. Your fingernails are made of keratin, just like your hair. It's just different densities of keratin, right? And those fingernails could be actual fingernails, or they can be claws, they can be hoofs. It's all made of the same stuff, right? Just formed differently or into different structures, right? All of these, so for the hoof, it's essentially a sheath that covers bone right here. So here you have the hoof, and it covers bone. Okay? It can also be formed in mats, and that's where you get things like rhino horns. That's mats and mats of extremely dense keratin that's built over a lifetime. Right? Very dense. And so if you've ever seen someone cut off a rhino horn, and nowadays it's done to prevent poaching. You just cut off the rhino horn, and now they won't shoot the rhino to get the horn. When they cut it off, it's very fibrous, and it's because it's all the hair, the keratin, that gets cut off and kind of stringy, right? That's because it's hair. Right? Now, that counts for cow horns, for pronghorn antlers, horns. They're actually a really cool sheath. I didn't bring any, should have. Counts for rhino horns, but not for deer and giraffe horns. They are not keratin. They're actually just bone. Deer antlers are straight bone.